Chapter 131. There was such an ease to the group as we sashayed down the corridor, as loose and free as if we'd been out for after-works drinks, and were now on our way to sweatily dance the evening away in our suits and shoes and ties. Yet most of us had only met an hour or two ago, and at least two of us had previously been numbered among the most reviled men in history. Of all OJ's tricks, I had to admire the swiftness with which his bonding session had brought us together, so perfectly executed with regard to the timing of those magic moustaches. Even George's lovely eggs had played their part, I was sure of it. Where we were going, and to what, I knew not and didn't care. For the first time in years I felt like part of a group, part of a common purpose, and as we moved along as one being, one mind, that was all right by me. Giggles and guffaws and gentle teasing and tugs on moustaches were the order of the day, and if the laughter subsided for even a few seconds, all we had to do was turn to fey Texas dandy George W. Bush, looking for all the world like he'd stepped out of some late 19th century saloon, and sides resumed to splitting once more. Especially given his bemused reaction to what exactly was so funny, since he rather liked his new look, and only wished his wife Laura was there to see it, after all these years of cooing in his ear and telling him how handsome he'd look if he only grew himself a moustache. "Yes, ma'am," he said, even though our party now included women only in spirit. "I do declare I shouldn't think I'd get much done today with Laura here to, persuade me to the household chores and to administering the business of the, chamber." We all just laughed. We had no clue what he was talking about, but he was a simple, good-natured fellow who didn't mind our giggles one bit. And then something suddenly dawned on me. These magic moustache disguises of ours, were they reversible? Would I be stuck like this? And would Rachel? I gave it a little tug, and it was as real and tear-inducing if I'd grown it myself. I sought out Rachel, deep in giddy conversation with Major Graham, and asked her if she'd tried to get her tash off. "Oh no," she said, "they don't come off, not for like a week or two. It's all governed from the central computer. No danger of these disguises slipping until the job is done." "But what," I said, "what about the rest of our bodies? I've noticed you've changed in some fairly dramatic ways," thinking, as ever, selfishly, and thinking of her breasts. "Like, what have you got going on in your downstairs mix-up?" Rachel just laughed, and then popped a couple of buttons on her boiler suit and stuck a hand inside. "Oh my," she said, her eyes growing wide. "That's much better than the last one. Here," she said, grabbing my hand. "You want to feel?" I pulled my hand away and stared at her in horror. "You mean—" "Uh-huh," she smiled. "But honestly, don't worry about it. It really is only temporary. If you're lucky, you'll maybe one day get to go on a mission where the tins don't contain moustaches, but earrings and lipstick. And you'll get to see things from my perspective. It's pretty fucking sweet for a week or two. Though I'm always glad to get back inside my own body when it's done. And I'm sure you will be too." I stopped in my tracks and watched her bound off down the corridor with giggly Major Graham, and soon enough the General was hooking my arm and dragging me along with him. "Mace," he said. "Call me Mace, please." "I'm trying," I said, "but something about it don't sound right. Wasn't there a Star Wars character called Mace? Not from the real Star Wars, I mean, but from the modern rubbish ones with all the stupid CGI in them." The General nodded his head. "Now, I wouldn't know about that," he said. "But if there is, I'm sure I predate him. I was born 2 years after the war, in 1947, and George Lucas was only 3 years old by then. But I know what you mean about all that CGI. Give me painted landscapes or miniature models or gigantic sets with casts of thousands and extras like in the biblical epics any day. Ray Harryhausen skeletons or Gone with the Wind sunsets may look a bit hokey to the modern eye, but at least there's something physical there for us viewers to get our teeth into. This whole current fad for wireframe superheroes bouncing from building to building is about as entertaining as watching some kid play a video game, which, as far as I can tell, is pretty much exactly what it is. And you can always see it in the eyes of an actor when they're standing in some soulless studio in front of a blue screen, talking to nothing and having to pretend that there's something there. How dispiriting, how embarrassing, and how far from what they must have dreamed of as a child, watching Burton and Olivier and Richard Harris and Steve McQueen. Just imagine how shit The Great Escape or The Bridge Over the River Kwai would have looked with CGI motorcycles and explosions and crowds. General, I said. Try Maz, he said. That's what OJ used to call me when we first met. Maz, I said. Yeah, that's better. Kind of. There's something I want to ask you about these moustaches. They come off, right? And our bodies go back to how they were. Afraid not, he laughed, and then seeing the look of panic on my face, he quickly about turned and changed his tune. Yeah, he said, just kidding you. Once the mission's done, so are these moustaches. You think I'd put one on if I thought I'd be stuck with this pot belly forever? I may be 70, but I got a fine set of abs, you know. Even better than AC's, and I'm sure he's shown you his. But listen, don't you worry about it and enjoy the vacation from yourself. It's not every day you get to be part of an undertaking like this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must go ask my brother something about that old Bronco he drives. Toodaloo. And off he went to whisper in AC's ear and leave me once again to play catch-up with the group. Would this thing come off? Would Rachel get her boobs and fanny back? Would I be back to being me? And what was the General talking about with the pot belly and the tash, given that he wasn't actually wearing one and had in fact been one of the three to shave theirs off? No matter. Instead of trying to figure all that out, I instead stuck my hands in my pants and was impressed by what I found in there. But then, wasn't what I'd just done exactly the equivalent to fondling another man's junk with another man's hand? Fuck. Just as I was starting to get used to things, my whole mind was being messed with once again. And then I realized nobody was messing with me. It was just me messing with myself. Nobody else cared about these incredible moustaches, and they were incredible, believe me, if only I could be assured that the effects were temporary. And since they'd very clearly used them before, and maybe even used them several times before, probably what I should do is take a cue from them and chill the hell out. Even Adolf Hitler, suddenly woken from a 60-year coma, made to shave and remove his most defining feature, and thrust into a strange new world full of black psychedelic guitarists and computers that could fabricate conversations and deepfake video, not to mention all the porn he would presumably be exposed to at some point. Even he was giddily going along with the ride in a far more relaxed and enjoyable way than I was. But what of Rachel? Rachel was now a man, and would be for the next week or two. I guess I was just going to have to get used to it. And now I looked like my Uncle David, circa 1983, and though that wasn't ideal, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. A momentary panic, a weird flipping out of the like I was well used to by now, but beginning to grow bored of. What was even the point of it? And how many more times would I freak and fear and journey down strange paranoid rabbit holes where I temporarily convinced myself that the whole thing was just a swizz and they were all out to get me? But just look at them, all happy-go-lucky and skipping along like Judy Garland and those three weird guys in suits. But at least guys in suits, and not some CGI-rendered thing you can tell isn't really there. Off to meet the wizard, simply because of the wonderful things he does, and, even more to the point, simply because. Be the cause of your experience, not the result of it, my old granddad used to say. It's not outside events that create your reality. It's what's in your mind and in your being that do that. So if you don't like what's going on in your head, simply think again. You can do that. You have that power. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old when he'd said those words to me, and understandably I hadn't understood. But now, 30-odd years later, walking along a corridor with some of the most well-known personalities in recent history, including one who was supposed to be dead, famous toothbrush moustache or not, the true meaning of his words was beginning to dawn on me. I was done with all my mad-headed nonsense. I wanted to skip like Dorothy and the Tin Man, even if I was skipping to my doom. What did it matter anyway? I'd still end up in the same place after all, and the road I was journeying on was far more interesting than the road I'd been on, and it was apparently the only road I could take, so I may as well make my way along it with a smile rather than a frown. I raced to catch up with the group. I found the man's body that housed the mind and spirit of the woman I loved. In her pants, some other man's penis dwelled, and God only knows what she'd get up to with it during the days and weeks ahead. But right now, none of that mattered, and with some other man's hand, I held hers, and the two of us walked along clasped tightly together, and everything was just fine. "Rachel Muscovitz," I said, leaning in her ear, "I think I'm in love with you, and I think I love you." I kissed her on her bearded cheek and strode on down the hall. A man can get used to just about anything, given enough time. Adaptability is perhaps the human's greatest asset. "Long corridor, this," I heard someone say, and then AC's unmistakable voice piped up. "Exactly as long as it has to be, if it's to reach the end at just the right time. Just like that old joke about the length of the man's legs, and how they only need to be long enough to reach the ground, no more, no less." Aye, I thought, but some men's legs are longer than that, and some are shorter too. And then I realized that didn't make any sense, though, if truth be told, I'd realized it even before I'd typed it, and still typed it anyway, just to see what would happen. "Ah, limey," AC said, putting his arm around me and ushering me through the door. "It's good to have you back. And honestly, don't you worry about Rachel. She'll be as fine as you remember her. The whole thing is written. Don't I keep telling you that? It's like this corridor. You just need to keep going till the end." Chapter 132. We were back in the main atrium of Area 66.6 and heading for the room I'd looked into earlier with the scientists and the car. In the other room, through the glass, the geeky guys still chortled and pointed and typed and laughed. What a great job, I thought, wondering if the General had been serious about getting me involved with that, just typing shite and giggling while people somewhere out there swallowed it all without even the most cursory fact-check or critical thought. I'd already dabbled in it myself, once posting an anonymous comment on an American woman's barking mad video that I'd seen troops moving through Mexico towards the US border, and voila, the very next day she was there reporting to her followers that a source had told her thousands of Chinese and Russian soldiers were advancing on and preparing to invade the US from the south, and that some were possibly already inside the country, and that there were tanks and big guns too. And it really quite blew my mind. Couldn't I just pop in there now and see what they were up to, make some friends, have a laugh too? But, as ever, no time. And now we were all gathered together with a man and a woman in goggles and white coats, standing around a silver DMC DeLorean, exactly like the one from the Back to the Future films. "So here's how this bit's gonna go," said AC. "I'm gonna give you the backstory, and then these two, indicating the scientists, will tell you the boring details of how everything works. And then, fingers crossed, Marlon here is going to supply us with the missing piece of the puzzle and turn this weird heap of metal and wires into a fully functioning time machine. That, God willing, will allow us all to travel 16 years into the past and do what needs to be done." I shuffled my way to the front of the group. "I beg your pardon," I said. "Me?" "Right," said AC, smiling at me, "but we'll get to that in a minute." He walked over to the DeLorean and stood with his hand on the roof. "This car," he said, "was discovered in Dallas, Texas, 1963, not far from the downtown area. We don't know where it came from or even whether it's of earthly origin. All we know is that, as far as all our tests tell us, it should possess the ability to travel through time. But something is missing, malfunctioning, some switch we're not flicking, some wires crossed somewhere. We've been working on it for nigh on 50 years, and we know it's pretty much as it should be, save for one crucial part. But where or what that part is, we're unsure." Major Graham raised his hand, and AC nodded at him to speak. "On the one hand, you say you're not sure if it's from Earth or not," he said, "but on the other that it's traveled through time. Couldn't it be that it simply arrived in Dallas from a distant planet? rather than, I presume, the future somewhere on this planet? That's a good question, Major, said AC, and it may be possible that you're right, or that both things are true. But what led us to believe that it came from Earth was what we discovered in the car when it was first found. He turned to the male scientist and received from him a small Ziploc bag. He held it up so we could all get a look. It was difficult to make out what was inside, save for the fact that there were a couple of small pieces of paper and some coins. We found these, he said, on the front seat, presumably dropped from the back pocket of whoever had been sitting in it. The coins are from the UK, a 20-pence piece dated 2007, and a 5-pence piece dated 2005. And the pieces of paper are a receipt from a Sainsbury's Express in Leeds, England, and a train ticket, an off-peak return from Leeds to Dewsbury. I took a few steps closer and squinted my eyes at the contents of the bag. That's my 25-pence piece, I said. I'd recognize it anywhere. I reached my hand to grab it, but AC was too quick for me. Not so fast, Marlon, he said. This is part of history, but don't you worry about the financial aspect of it. You'll be more than amply compensated, trust me. I tried to get a look at the receipt, but couldn't work out the details. Then I figured I'd just ask him. Good question, he said, not needing to look at the items themselves, but knowing the details off by heart. The receipt is for a bag of Sainsbury's Basic Raisins, costing 99p, and purchased at 10:23 hours on July the 28th of this year, and the train ticket was purchased later the same day, at 15:33 hours. That's my friend Stephen's birthday, I said. I remember buying those raisins and taking that train. I took him a box of Jaffa cakes and we ate them off the plate, making out like we were posh. Christ, feels like it was years ago, but it was only a month. I shook my head and, not for the first time, felt my shaky grip on time and the surreality of this Icarusian flight resound in me. It was also, said AC, the day before you first spoke to OJ. We had operatives waiting for you at both locations, and, yes, I said, I remember seeing a couple of guys in dark suits and sunglasses at the Sainsbury's, standing by the crisps. AC laughed and shook his head. Not those guys, he said. I'm not sure who they were. Actually, it was me, in disguise, working behind the counter. The little old lady with the Barnsley accent, I said. AC smiled proudly and twirled his moustache. Wow, I thought, what the hell kind of technology did these people have that they could change a 6'5", 250-pound linebacker from San Francisco so convincingly into a grandma from Yorkshire? And then something occurred to me. But wait, I said, my mind trying to wrap itself around a conundrum. Didn't you say earlier that you'd been following me for years, that you'd been guiding me, and that you already knew I was from this unique timeline you mentioned? That's right, said AC. We knew about you, and we knew that someone important would combine those raisins. Pretty shitty raisins, by the way. I don't know why you don't splash out and buy the good ones. But we didn't know that you were one and the same person. We'd been waiting 50-some years to find out who in hell left that receipt in that car. Right back to a time before you guys in England even had the system of currency you have now. That pre-decimalization shit, man, that's Forgive me for interrupting, I said. But if you have access to all possible pasts and presents and futures and all possible timelines, couldn't you have just found out it was me years ago? The General stepped forward and stood meaningfully by the car, running his hand along its length. These are excellent questions, Limey, he said. Shows that you're really thinking and that some of what we've got going on here is starting to rub off on you. Really excellent questions, and questions with answers that, alas, are none too pleasant for us to digest here at the Bureau. You see, it's not quite true that every possible timeline or future is available for us to examine in close detail. There's something about the one that you and Rachel here, he pointed to the dreadlocked dude currently housing my love, come from. Something we've never quite been able to discern. And what we're worried about is that someone else may have, which really is what we're all doing here today. A cloud of ominousness nestled in the room and hung low over our heads. Nobody said a word. Then OJ stepped forward and placed his hand on the car. "There are some futures," he said, "that are not set in stone, that change from moment to moment, that are unreadable even by us. Imagine life as a video game. Every possibility of what a character or spaceship can do in the present and in the future already exists within the reality of that game. But it's not until you make your choice that you get to live and step into that future. This, of course, you know. But what we're talking about here are possibilities that exist outside of the rules of the game." "It's not an easy one to get your head around," AC said, leaning casually against the bonnet of the car, first with arms folded, then placed behind him so he could angle himself back. "But the thing is, what we're here to do should close off such loopholes once and for all. This is the whole purpose of our mission, along with preventing the almost total annihilation of life on this planet as we know it." The ominous cloud had become heavy and stifling. If I had it right, what they were saying is that there were things outside of their control after all, that they weren't quite as omnipotent and omnipresent as they led me to believe, and that they didn't like it one bit. Also, that there was something about me and the timeline I'd once inhabited that was uniquely wrapped up with the whole thing, and that there was something I had to do that was going to sort it all out. But what it was, I hadn't a clue, and the thought of the responsibility of it was beginning to get me down. Maybe it was time for a piss. Maybe just lock myself in the cubicle for a while and hide there until everyone went home, and then sneak out of a vent or a rubbish chute, or climb into a laundry basket and wake up under the blue sky that must be out there somewhere, but which by now felt about 1,000,000 miles away. But no, if everything depended on me, and if everything was written, well, almost everything, then, overwhelming though it was, I figured I had to have it within me somewhere. What was it my old granddad used to say? If you don't have it, you don't need it. And if you need it, you'll have it. Otherwise, you don't really need it. Something like that. "Okay," I said, stepping out from the group and hoisting myself up onto the bonnet of the car and sitting cross-legged. "Let's get this show on the road. No need for the science of the hows and the whys. For sure, it'd all be totally over my head anyway, and I know I'm not the only one." I looked there at W, even though I tried not to. "So how about we make it just the 10 of us, no offense guys, and do what needs to be done. Enough chitter-chatter. Let's rock." Those last two words I said ironically, attempting an impersonation of the hardcore Latino chick from Aliens, but I'm not sure anybody picked up on the reference. Definitely not Hitler or the General. But still, it seemed to have the desired effect, and AC and OJ looked unsuitably impressed and sent the scientists on their way. The windows were dimmed and we were given privacy, and I jumped down from the bonnet and peered into the open window to try and work out how to jump-start this thing. I knew next to nothing about cars or time machines, but I did know life had brought me there for a reason. "There's something missing," AC said, "from the mechanisms. The plutonium's there, the flux capacitor's there, the eye of harmony is there, but still it won't go. We even had Spielberg replicated in his Back to the Future movies in the hope that it would jog somebody's memory or create a shift in the collective consciousness once it existed in enough people's thoughts and minds, but nothing." "I never saw those films," I said, "though I can picture a poster or video cover or something, and maybe an image of this car flying, but that's about it." "That's Back to the Future 2, said the General. "The one where the doc, man, that guy is funny, has come back from—" No, said OJ. "It flies at the end of part 1 as well, remember? Marty has to put trash in it to make it go. And the doc says something like, 'Roads, where we're going, we don't need no roads.' And then the wheels retract and—" "Okay," I said, "but I don't see how any of that helps me. You say there's a missing part. I say I've never seen it before, but—" Wait, it wasn't true that I hadn't seen it before. Suddenly I got a glimpse of something buried deep within my psyche. Again, like the episode with the ogre's password, I couldn't be sure if it was from this lifetime or some ancient lifetime or a distant dream or a hallucination or what. "I have seen it," I said, "but I have no idea when." I pushed a button on the door and watched it rise delectably into the air. I sat in the front seat and placed my hands on the wheel and closed my eyes. Somehow, I had to be able to access this memory. It was right there, somewhere in the vicinity of the tip of my mind's tongue, but no matter how I flicked or stretched or rolled that tongue, it seemed forever out of reach. It was like trying to remember the name of the least memorable kid in school. I could see his face, his shoes, his satchel and knee socks and cap, but his anonymity and the sheer lack of contact we'd had during those years in those buildings made it impossible to retrieve. I squeezed the wheel and my eyes so hard I figured at least one of them would break. And then I let it all go and sat relaxed in the darkness of my mind and ceased all striving. I could feel the energy of the group gathering around me, shuffling into place around the DeLorean and holding hands. "Ow," I heard George W. say, "my goddamn little toe." And with that my eyes snapped open and I knew exactly what I had to do. It was, again, like a message from the ether, from some other version of me, from the deep, dark dungeon depths of my poor adult mind. I climbed back out of the seat and emptied my pockets on the bonnet, rifling through the contents. The photo, the tea bags, the mayonnaise, the condoms. No time for shame here, no time for embarrassment. There was work to be done. And there it was, slid inside the packet of condoms, the small grain of a delicate crystalline substance about as big as a Rice Krispie, or the front end of a beetle, or the bit of plastic in the end of a Bic biro. I lifted it up gently and carried it into the car's interior. Could this really be the piece they had been waiting for all these years? How had it gotten into my pocket? Who had put it there? And how did I know? But no matter the who's and how's and why's and when's, all that mattered was giving it a shot. I sat in the driver's seat and looked around me, and then I knew exactly what I had to do, and popped it into the glove compartment and waited. "How do you know these things, Limey?" AC asked, open-mouthed. "I've never seen anything like it." "I just know," I said. "I just know." And, sure enough, the headlights popped up and glared against the blacked-out windows, and the radio started, and Europe's final countdown blasted from the speakers, and the engine turned over and rumbled, and various digits and letters flashed up on the primitive computer readout, and I knew that it was time. "Quick!" OJ shouted. "Everybody in the car!" And so began a mad scramble to cram the 10 of us in there, legs and arms sticking everywhere, 2 on each front seat and 1 laying across our laps, and then 5 in the back, including the 12'10" combined lengths of the General and AC, and heads and snouts and faces smushed up against the glass, and Martha complaining about the location of Hitler's ass. "Damn," said OJ, sitting in the passenger seat next to me with Lieutenant Daniel and the top half of George W. pressed upon his lap. "I should have set the date before we all got in. I don't think I can reach it." "My arms are pinned," I said. "Mine too," said everyone else who was within the vicinity. "If we don't get the date set right now," said OJ, "we'll be catapulted into some random dimension where time and space don't exist as we know it, and it will all been for nothing. That's what happens when it's set to all 8s and the numbers are flashing." But just as hope seemed lost and our molecules were readying to go bye-bye, a slow southern drawl sounded and saved the day. "Don't worry, y'all," George W. said, stretching towards the console with his left pinky. "I got this." "Hurry," said OJ. "We only have a few seconds." I thought about making a joke, about how it was good that they hadn't asked me to do it, what with our different ways of ordering the day and the month, and then I remembered it was set to the UK way. "Wait," I cried out, "put the 9s where the 1 goes, and vice versa." But it was already too late, and George W. Bush had catapulted us back to the 9th of January, 2001. Chapter 133. Or rather, he hadn't, because I was wrong about the formatting of the date on the computer display. As OJ informed me later, it was one of the things they'd changed while they'd been tinkering with it over the decades, given that no one at Area 66.6 could understand our cockamamie way of going from small to larger to largest, when their system of medium to small to largest was obviously the best. This was after, of course, once we'd all painfully extracted ourselves from the DeLorean and rubbed our bones and stretched our legs in what appeared to be some kind of underground car park. "Welcome," said AC, "to September 2001. Fallen by Alicia Keys is top of the Billboard Hot 100. Rush Hour 2 is killing it at the box office, and Friends is gearing up for its 8th season. This is also one of the last days on Earth when 9/11 is nothing more than an emergency number." He solemnly closed his eyes, and I detected a shudder in his soul. He crossed himself and silently mouthed some little prayer. I turned to the General and asked what was going on. "All in good time," he said. "I imagine OJ has some little speech cooked up to inform us of why we're here." I looked over to Hitler, who seemed baffled by our sudden teleportation to another location. "They didn't show you movies in that tube, eh?" I said, "even though they taught you pretty good English. I guess you've not been quite so acclimatized to the notion of time travel as we have." "I read the H.G. Wells book when I was in school," he said, fuck me. "But it seemed a little far-fetched to me. And yet, if I am to believe these guys," he said, indicating at OJ and AC and Martha and the General standing in a huddle, "traveling in time is exactly what we have just done. You think maybe we could go back to 1942 next? Perhaps I could persuade my former self it was not such a great idea to invade Russia after all." German's not that hard. Why can't I do a German accent? He let out a laugh like an old smoker hacking up their lungs, and I smiled at his joke. And then I saw Rachel read my mind and reach into the DeLorean and remove the previously missing piece from the time machine, just in case any of the old Hitler remained and decided to surface. Best not to take any chances with these things. She winked at me, and I fell in love with her some more. "Right," said OJ, striding over to the group and clapping his hands together. "First of all, everybody make it okay? Good. Second, you two." He held out his arm and pointed out 2 fingers. "Get this thing secured and covered up. Third, let's all reconvene at the Bronco in exactly 14 seconds. "At the Bronco?" I asked, puzzled. "Affirmative," said OJ, eager to get a move on. "But where is it?" I said. "Right there," OJ answered, pointing about 12 car parking spaces away. "Aha," said AC, smiling broadly. "So that's where I put it." And while Daniel and Graham draped a tarp over the DeLorean, we hurried ourselves over to the Bronco and readied for Phase 2.